Welcome to this documentary. Max Lugavere, can you tell us a little bit about your background and where you spend your time today?
Yeah, so my background is as a filmmaker and journalist. I was pre-med in college and I ended up double majoring in film and psychology. And I made a film as an undergraduate exploring my passions at the time, which ended up landing me a dream job anchoring and producing content for a TV network that Al Gore co-founded in the United States called Current TV. And it was this little watched sort of network. It was a startup, but that experience allowed me the opportunity to work with and learn from some of the best storytellers and journalists in the world. So Peabody Award-winning journalists, and I got to cover everything from health and science to spirituality to fashion to politics. I was a generalist, and I enjoyed the opportunity that allowed me. But my passions really have always been health, nutrition, fitness, and when I left Current TV to sort of explore where I wanted to go with my career, having had all that incredible experience under my belt, it was around that time that my mother started to display early signs of memory loss, and I didn't really know what I was seeing at the time. I had no prior family history of dementia or any kind of neurodegenerative disease, and certainly my mom was not old at the time. She was 58. She was a vibrant, spirited blonde from New York, and seeing and hearing my mom complain about brain fog and problems with her memory caught me and my family completely off guard. And because I was in between projects, I was able to go with her to some of the top hospitals in the United States. I went with her to the Cleveland Clinic. I went with her to Johns Hopkins University uh, down in Baltimore. And of course, she lives in New York, so we have access to incredible medical establishments here. But it was at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio where my mom, for the first time, was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease, and that's when she was prescribed, the chemical band-aids that they often prescribe people with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and that was a really traumatic week for me,
I'm
to say
sure.
the least. Yeah, I'm a pretty chill guy, but that week was the first time in my life I'd ever had a panic attack. Just thinking about what my mom was going through, my own ignorance, the sort of helplessness that I felt, and fear for what was sort of to come. And I began almost immediately doing my own research. As I mentioned, I had this background in journalism, and occasionally I would get the opportunity to cover stories that involved health and nutrition and things like that. So, and I also had sort of, over the course of my life, been really interested in health and fitness. So I knew where to find good quality research. And that was the first place, those websites, PubMed, those were the first places that I went when my mom got sick. And I just started, I began with a theory. My theory was that because my mom was young and because I had no prior family history of dementia, there had to be something environmental triggering my mom's illness. And I thought that to some degree, diet was probably implicated. And I began looking into diet and Alzheimer's disease. My mom hadn't been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, but Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. And so I was like, okay, well, there's got to be some answers that I could glean from
Right.
Alzheimer's research.
So, as a journalist, as someone who is a professional communicator and the kind of training that you also had access probably to a lot of other people that the average individual who's looking up PubMed and
Yeah.
is passionate about the subject, you had access in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely, initially was mostly paralyzed by my own fear.
Mm,
And so my research was, I started watching every single TED talk that I could find on the subject. I started reading every book I could find on the subject. And I certainly began looking into the references sections of those books and looking up the research, the primary literature itself. I like to say that the whole time I remained skeptical of everything that I was reading, as I think a scientist should, but never cynical. I remained, always open to new ideas and new perspectives. And so, at a certain point, I realized, that I had a sort of aha moment where I realized that I have something very unique that very few people in my shoes, going through what I was going through with my mom, had, and that was media credentials. I had a verified mark on Twitter. And that's power in some parts. And so I began reaching out to scientists, namely the researchers who were sort of publishing the research that I was reading, and I began asking if I could interview them. And initially, I had access to a few websites where I was able to sort of publish things as a blog. But ultimately, I had the idea to create a documentary of my own, and I decided to do a documentary that I called Breadhead, which my aim for it was to be the first ever dementia prevention documentary. And so, through using that as a vehicle, I began reaching out to researchers around the world that were publishing the studies that I was reading that really are working to prove that we have a say in our cognitive health. So I've interviewed researchers from Harvard, Brown, Cornell, the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, Charité Hospital in Berlin. These are the top research institutions in the world. And I had the unique ability to go and talk to some of the top researchers. And a lot of the insights that I was able to glean from those interviews, I wrapped into this documentary, Breadhead, which I'm super excited to present to the world. But at a certain point, between doing all of my own research and having conversations with these researchers and then broadening out to clinicians who are the point of care providers that are actually translating what is discovered in science, I became an expert, in my own right.
So becoming an expert and really being able to sort of pull back the curtain on this information,
Yeah.
what do you see as a different platform that you have maybe in today's climate with social media and so forth? How do you see the differences?
Yeah, it's a great question. In a way, I look at my mom and I look at her generation, and I think that they were, in a way, sort of made unwitting victims of the lack of information that was available to them. My mom got her nutritional information from reading the New York Times and whatever magazines were she was reading, but they didn't have the internet. And today, things are different. We have all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips on our smartphones, in our pockets 24 hours a day. We've got PubMed, and certainly not all studies are free, but there are a lot of open access journals out there that allow this information to be read by pretty much anybody. Not everybody's going to have the ability or time to sift through all the jargon, for example, but the point is, we live in a time where this information is out there. Maybe 50 years ago, only the doctor could know about health. Only the nutritionist could, have the license to say that they knew anything about nutrition. But yeah, the curtain, I think, has been not only pulled back, but it's never going to close. So this information is out there, and I think it gives the ability for all of us to become sort of experts in our own health. And so over the course of my journey, it never sort of occurred to me that because I'm not a medical doctor, there was any sort of ceiling to the information that I was able to teach myself. I just kind of went at it with a sort of open mind and the fortitude to do the homework and to be vulnerable and to be humble enough to ask questions to people that know, more than me. But at the end of the day, research is out there, and you can go to any journal and read the introduction and read the discussion, and from that, you can glean a lot. They're all cited, so you can follow those links and read the introductions and read even if you can't interpret the data, even if you have no idea what a p-val, what an n is or a p-value is, or how to interpret the trials. I mean, there's a lot you can glean, and then when you match those research articles with the press releases that are put out by the universities, often to accompany those research articles, and you read the sort of layman's version, and then you compare it to the data in the article, you can essentially teach yourself how to interpret research. And I'm not saying that that is in any way a replacement for, what you get from a, advanced degree, but you can learn a lot, is what I'm saying. And, I think 50 years ago, I would understand if you came about health from a place of ignorance, but today I don't think that there's really an excuse for ignorance. I think, the information is out there, and a lot of it's free. And social media allows you to access other experts and connect with them, and that's essentially what I did. So it's I think we live in a great time. I want to prevent others from becoming victimized in the way that I feel that my mom was.
And you as well,
Yeah.
right? If this was a diagnosis that had no family history. How does it relate to you and your own health?
Well, I guess, it's not even something that I learned necessarily. It's just, I intuited that whatever those early symptoms were that I saw in my mom that bubbled up to the surface, that led us to going to visiting those neurologists, wasn't something that developed overnight. It's
Right.
something that obviously, like all chronic diseases, took years to develop. And so it was a really strong call to action to me to examine my own diet and my own lifestyle and to make changes in accordance with what I was reading in the literature. So, I used to believe that my diet was near optimal. I was consuming a lot of grains, predominantly in their whole grain format. So I was in the 1% of grain consumers. Okay, I was not eating refined white flour. I was eating lots of whole grains, and I kind of my own diet was dictated by the notion that eating more grains is better than eating less grains. So I wouldn't touch white rice. But if you put a huge bowl of brown rice in front of me, I would devour it. And I'd probably go back for seconds. I would not eat any white pasta, but I would eat as much, whole wheat pasta as I could stuff myself with. As a young person who, I've never had problems with my weight. I was probably very insulin sensitive. I would still feel like over the course of the day, my energy was like a roller coaster.
Hmm.
I would be starving by the time lunch would hit. Soon after lunch, before dinner, I would always find myself to be starving again, and I would never understand why that was. And yet, I would continue to treat the withdrawal that I was feeling by eating more carbs and eating more sugar. And I just, I thought that that's what life was like, like I didn't think that there was any other option. And as I started to explore the relationship between blood sugar and brain health and cognitive function, and ultimately metabolic health and body composition, I realized that grains were probably doing to me and my energy levels a lot more harm than good. And I realized that there's no human biological requirement for grains. This is something that we're sort of somehow led to believe, through television marketing and those pretty little heart logos on the boxes of cereals, that somehow we need to eat oatmeal in the morning or, grains with lunch, that somehow without them we're going to be, worse off. And there's really no evidence for that. I mean, when you look at the evidence that's out there to suggest that grains improve health, you won't find any. In fact, a recent analysis performed by Cochrane, which is this organization known for their systematic reviews of medical literature in partnership with the World Health Organization, when they looked at randomized control trials, which are the kinds of trials required to prove cause and effect, they found no good evidence that whole grains improve health. Whole grains might be benign if you're metabolically healthy, but the idea that they improve health, there's really no good evidence for that. So, I mean, if I'm putting things in my mouth, if I'm, consuming foods, I want to eat things that are improving my health, not keeping it static.
Right. So you're doing this research, you're learning what your mother really needs.
Yeah,
And through that process, you start to examine your own
exactly.
choices.
Yeah.
And as you recognize that grains are not going to improve your health, where do you go from there?
I realized early on that grains are essentially what they feed cattle in factory farms, which are deplorable, and I just started to really question the notion that I need to eat these types of foods. Simultaneously, at the same time, I became interested in learning about the foods that actually do improve health. And I realized that 9% of Americans consume the required amount of vegetables per day, according to the
Wow.
CDC. And I was very likely in that category. And so I started looking at, the mechanisms behind how vegetables might actually improve my health. And, the truth is vegetables are among the most nutrient dense kinds of food there are. You take kale or spinach. Take spinach, for example. Spinach, it's one of the top sources, if not the top source, of magnesium in the diet, which is an incredibly important nutrient, which is required for hundreds of enzymatic processes in the body. It's a top source of dietary folate. It's an incredible source of fiber. It's these are the kinds of things that we need that actually improve health, right?
Lutein, it's incredible for lutein, and we need as much lutein as possible for cognitive health, as
Cognitive
well as
health,
the
yeah,
impact from blue light. You're
exactly,
right. I mean,
exactly,
spinach is like a rock star.
yeah.
But you'd have to eat almost 2 cups of spinach every day to get the kind of lutein that we need.
Well, but spinach is not the only source. I mean, you
That's
can
right.
you can eat spinach, you can eat kale, you can eat eggs. Egg
Yes.
yolks are an incredible source
Yep.
of lutein and
Yeah.
zeaxanthin, which boost eye health. It boosts these are
Yeah.
carotenoids that boost brain health. And so, yeah, these are the kinds of foods that we need to eat more of. Not grains. Grains are mostly starch, okay? So mostly just chains of glucose, which is sugar, and a little bit of insoluble fiber, which basically acts like sort of sandpaper to your insides, and a tiny, tiny amount of vitamins. So why do we need that? There's no mechanism by which we need grains. I mean, certainly enjoy grains if you want. They're not toxic, but the notion that we need to eat them for health is just absurd. So spinach, kale, nuts, like the healthy fats found in nuts, extra virgin olive oil, incredibly healthy. I'm a big believer in eating, a moderate amount of grass-fed beef, which I think is a health food. Grass-fed beef is, packed with, uh, again, carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, which is found in the fat. Because cows that eat grass, which are packed with carotenoids, then those carotenoids embed themselves in their meat. So when you eat, grass-fed beef, you're getting these brain and eye health boosting carotenoids. You're getting, a biologically appropriate ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. You're getting CLA, which is, being studied as a potential fat burner and cancer fighter.
Right.
And, researchers speculate that it's access to meat, and in fact cooked meat, that catalyze the growth of our brains because it's such a nutrient and energy dense food. And so, I eat couple servings of grass-fed beef per week. Fatty fish is incredibly important, obviously. Fatty fish is, packed with DHA, which actually helps build your brain cells. This is really important because, for a long time it was thought that adult neurogenesis was impossible, that, our brains sort of reach their maximum size and power in our mid-20s, only to begin sort of a long, gradual decline until the end of life. But now we know that adults can grow new brain cells, particularly in the vulnerable memory center of the brain, the hippocampus, up until the point at which we die. So the fact that we're able to continue growing brain cells means that we need to supply our brains with the appropriate building blocks to do so. So by eating fatty fish and getting, DHA, which is a really, healthy source of fat, or if you're vegan, algal oil or krill oil, so vitally important. These are the kinds of things that boost health. Grains don't boost health, and especially if you're one of the 50% of the U.S. population that's either diabetic or pre-diabetic, and you've essentially become glucose intolerant. Adding grains into that equation is a recipe for disaster.
So even for you, when you transformed your own health and you started to eat these,
Yeah.
these fatty foods, these fish, the grass-fed meats, and tons of vegetables,
Yeah.
what happened to your energy? How did your experience of the day, even, let's just take the day, change?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely once I started adopting this higher fat, low carb, high vegetable diet, I definitely noticed that my own focus and my own attention and my own ability to convey ideas improved. I'm a professional communicator, so for a living, I go on TV and I communicate these relatively heady ideas in a way that people can understand them. So I'm very attuned to whether or not I'm on or I'm off. And I noticed that once I adopted this diet, I was much more frequently on and way more infrequently off. And I know that I'm an N of one study, but the literature really validates the improvement in executive function that I subjectively felt in myself. And as a sort of happy side bonus, which has never really been my focus, but it's just nice, along the way is I inadvertently ended up getting in the best shape of my life as well. I exercise a lot, and I do it primarily for the benefit to my own mental health that I feel when I go to the gym. But eating a sort of lower carb diet and exercising in accordance with what I know to benefit the brain, I've gotten leaner and stronger than I've ever been in my life.
Why do you think, Max, that we've got it so wrong? How do you think we just went from like everything that you're saying right now is what we all want, right?
Yeah.
We want that improved cognitive function. We want to grow those additional brain cells. We want to live our lives in the best way possible. We want the side effect to be the best shape we've ever been
Yeah.
in. I mean, we want all of these things. And you were in this place where you're trying to help your mother and you recognize, wow, that could be me 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
And you discover this complete transformation for your life. And it's just so counter to the way we're living our lives in this country.
Yeah.
What went wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think past generations have really been, they didn't have the internet. And so the only insights that past generations were able to glean about their own biology and their own health, unless they were doctors, were from the government or were from the media. And today, those forces still exist. Oh, and also food companies. Food companies and marketers. I mean, there were a lot of complicit parties in, the information that was force fed to previous generations. And today, those forces still exist. We're still told by our government to include grains at every meal for good health. That's according to the My Plate eating paradigm put out by the USDA. Again, when there's no good evidence from randomized controlled trials. So that's not an evidence-based recommendation to include grains at every meal because there's no evidence that grains improve health. So that's just one example. Take the demonization of fat that occurred over the past 50 years, because of really flawed science and the food industry really sort of seizing the opportunity to market and sell products to consumers that were in line with this notion that fat was somehow bad for us. This important nutrient that was so vital to our evolution was suddenly, over the past 50 years, something that humans should for some reason avoid. The food industry really seized that moment to sell very unhealthy oils to the public, but previous generations again weren't privy to dissenting voices. There were no opposing voices. The conversation just wasn't, something that could be had because if you weren't a doctor or you weren't a nutritionist or you weren't somebody in a high, public office, you just had no access to any real information. Today, that's different. Today, we have, research that's out there on the internet on PubMed. We've got universities publishing press releases that everybody is privy to. We've got, books coming out on the subject. We've got TED Talks. We've got, health gurus. There's all this information out there, and you still need to be your own sleuth and do your own research because everybody's different at the end of the day. So, for you've got to take these, nuggets where you can find them and put them into practice in your own life and kind of experiment, be willing to observe your own health and have patience. And if something's not working for you, you've got to be willing to sort of pivot from that. Science is it's a method of asking questions, and we can all do science in our own lives. I think one of the most important things about, being your own sort of seeker of truth is to always be willing to challenge your own hypotheses and your own theories, So for a long time, once I learned that fat was not bad for me, I was sort of throwing butter on, I was like, butter's back. I'm just going to put butter on everything. I'm going to throw butter in my coffee and my smoothies. I'm going to wash my face with it. I never did that. But we all have different genes, and some people, for example, might over-respond, to saturated fat, for example. So chasing saturated fat as a nutrient, there's really not a lot of good evidence as that, for that as being sort of a beneficial thing, and for some people actually may not be positive. Science, we don't know. So this is one of those instances where we just have to be willing to experiment and kind of, get labs and be just sort of inquisitive about our own biology.
So, do you still chase butter or?
I'll cook with butter certainly because it's a very stable, from a chemical standpoint, it's a very stable fat to use for higher heat cooking, and I enjoy the taste. So yeah, I'll use it when I want to, but I also don't chase butter consumption like it's this magical food. There's really no good evidence for that. I mean, when I think about oils and fats that there's really a robust body of evidence to show that it's actually beneficial, I think about extra virgin olive oil. There was a very large study performed in Spain called the Predimed trial where they looked at extra virgin olive oil consumption on the order of a liter per week per individual. And they found that consuming that much extra virgin olive oil actually improved risk factors for cardiovascular disease, improved cognitive function, and also helped patients lose weight. So when I think about like where the evidence is, it really seems to be in favor of extra virgin olive oil as a dietary oil. And if you want to use butter. But I think like chasing it like it's this magical food, there's really no evidence for that. But is it tasty AF? Yes.
You mentioned the dietary guidelines coming from the USDA. Could you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, for the past couple of decades, we had the USDA food pyramid advising us to load up on grains, right? 7 to 11 servings per day if you want to be healthy of
Right.
grains. That food pyramid paradigm was an economic instrument more than it was anything else. And thankfully, the USDA food pyramid is retired now, but it's been replaced by the USDA My Plate. And what does the My Plate model still advise? For us to include grains at every meal. And there's no good evidence that grains improve health. The best you could hope for if you're metabolically healthy is that grains are benign. And in fact, if you are, working out and exercising vigorously, then you can use grains as a tool. As I mentioned, you can have a bowl of brown or white rice after a workout to replenish your muscles with glycogen. But to make that a sort of generalized recommendation to the American people, I think is doing a lot more harm than good. And so, that continues to be something that people are force fed, no pun intended, today. And, again, I think it's an economic instrument more than anything else.
The USDA is an agricultural
Yeah.
organization. How does that fit in? Like, how do you see that fitting into making the recommendations for the foods we should be eating?
It's a massive conflict of interest. So, yeah, I don't think that we should be taking dietary advice from the government, to be totally honest. I mean, there are incrementally like positive steps being made. Like food labels now have to list the amount of added sugar, I think, which is a step in the right direction. The FDA recently banned trans fats or hydrogenated fats, I should say, from the food supply, which is positive. Few people realize that the processing of grain and seed oils like canola oil actually creates trans fats. So it's not like our diets are free of trans fats. They're still going to be present if you're eating, unhealthy grain and seed oils.
Explain that a little bit more.
So the grain and seed oils like canola, grapeseed, corn, soy, these oils are so heavily processed, and the processing of them damages the oils. And at the end of the day, a damaged oil is going to damage you. But these oils, one of the steps in the production process for these oils is a deodorization process that basically makes them tasteless and scentless, odorless, because these oils are not necessarily that way. They have to be processed so that they can be squeezed into every crevice of the food supply, right? It's these like you can take canola oil, you can put it in a granola bar, you can put it in a salad dressing, you can put it in pretty much anything in pizza, and it has no flavor. So these oils are produced to be tasteless and odorless, and the deodorization process actually creates trans fats. And they've done research where they've looked at even organic, canola oil on the shelves at, regular supermarkets, and they've found up to 5% of the oil is actually trans fat, which is incredibly unhealthy. And if you consider the fact that, most people on average consume about 20 grams of canola oil per day, I mean, that's a significant amount of trans fat that you're consuming. And trans fat is toxic.
So, in these 20 grams of canola oil, where are most people getting that? Because it's not necessarily what they're using in their frying pan to cook
Yeah.
with, right?
Yeah, canola oil is found predominantly, and grain and seed oils, they're found predominantly in packaged processed foods and served to us in restaurants. The reason for that being is that they're very cheap. So like a restaurant is not going to use the highest quality extra virgin olive oil or grass-fed butter to cook their food in. They're going to use really cheap oils with high smoke points, like grapeseed oil, corn oil, soybean oil. And again, they're tasteless, so customers are not going to notice. So yeah, when you eat at a restaurant, the vast majority of time, when you're eating anything that's been deep fried or sautéed or brushed with oil just before being roasted, they're generally not, I would say 99% of the time they're going to be from these really unhealthy oils. And then in the modern supermarket, they're most commonly found in granola bars, bakery products, um, packaged foods, essentially. So when people ask me how to shop, I generally will tell people to shop around the perimeter of the supermarket, because when you buy fresh produce, meats and things like that, you're basically avoiding those really unhealthy oils. They predominantly lie in the aisles where they're baked into the packaged foods that Americans are now eating, way too much of.
You see, there's such a transition toward eating out, right? Like we eat out
Mm-hmm.
more now probably than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost as if we've got a blindfold on, because unless you're understanding exactly what you just said, like how is this salad dressing at this restaurant being prepared?
Yeah.
They're certainly not necessarily using these, high quality, expensive cooking oils or salad dressing oils, olive oils, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, owning a restaurant's a hard business.
Yeah.
So restaurant owners cost cut wherever they can. And what's the first place that a restaurant owner is going to cut costs? In ways that are invisible. So by replacing extra virgin olive oil or grass-fed butter with these really cheap, tasteless oils, customers are never going to know. You can be in the highest end restaurant in your city, and chances are, if there's oil involved in the food that you're eating, it's going to be from these incredibly cheap, incredibly damaging oils. There's a huge health food oriented supermarket that's ubiquitous in the United States. I'm not going to name it, but if you go to their prepared food section, the salad bar usually, all of the prepared foods that are in that salad bar are made with canola oil. And they say it, right? They're non GMO organic canola oil. But still, organic non GMO canola oil, those are just wellness buzzwords to hide the fact that canola oil is incredibly damaging and incredibly easily oxidized. And you take that oil and you put it in this hot food salad bar and you have it sit there all day, exposed to heat, exposed to oxygen. Those foods are so unhealthy. And this is like a supermarket chain that's like marketed as being probably the healthiest place that you could shop in America. So again, it's like we're being thrown misguided nutritional direction from every which way. And that's, I think, that's one of the major reasons why our health is in the shape that it's in.
Some of the things that you've learned as you've gone into this low carb, higher fat diet for your own health,
Yeah.
can you share some of the observations? For example, you were talking to me a little bit about salt.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So I've become really interested in salt and sodium as of late. Uh, Sodium is another one of these things that's been demonized for the past 50 years. We somehow see the craving of salt and salty foods as this moral failure, right? But sodium is a nutrient. People don't realize that, but sodium is a nutrient. And when you eat a lot of carbs and sugar, which causes your pancreas to secrete insulin chronically throughout the day, it causes your kidneys to unnaturally hold on to more sodium. So actually, the fact that we've demonized sodium for the past 50 years doesn't make a lot of sense from that perspective. And in fact, when you eat a diet that is low, if not devoid of processed foods, and you're eating a low carb diet, as I now am, and then you do things that promote accelerated sodium depletion, like you exercise vigorously, you sweat a lot, you drink a lot of coffee, which causes you to pee a lot, you actually need to be cognizant of getting enough sodium. And so, since I've started, since I've become interested in sodium research, I've actually been adding more salt, healthy salt, to my diet. And I don't go for the highly processed, refined white salt, which usually has a lot of fillers, and actually they add sugar to it and anti-caking agents.
Wow.
I mean, and it's also the salt that you normally get in packets. It's unnaturally pure. It's like just pure sodium.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you were to use, salt, for example, from an ancient lake or Himalayan pink salt, it's predominantly sodium, but there's actually a ton of other trace elements and minerals in it. So it's a much healthier salt. And again, if you're drinking a lot of coffee or you're exercising a lot, and by the way, coffee has been shown to be really beneficial to health. When you're exercising a lot and you're sweating a lot and you're losing sodium, you really need to be replacing those lost electrolytes. So when I think your average American who's eating 300 grams of carbs is told to watch their sodium intake, I think that that's the wrong advice. I think that the advice should be to, you know, lower the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating, stop being hyperinsulinemic, let your insulin levels come down, and your body will naturally expel salt, or sodium rather. And in terms of like the benefits, when you eat a low sodium diet, it actually makes your body want to secrete more insulin. So that can lead to long-term problems.
Interesting.
Yeah, that can lead to problems long-term. And also, what I've learned is that sodium helps vitamin C get into the brain. Vitamin C is really important as an antioxidant, of course, but also to help the brain produce neurotransmitters.
My doctor actually put me on sodium
Oh,
several
really?
years ago, yeah, and
Wow.
everyone thought, what's going on here? But it was for those exact reasons. I just wasn't getting enough sodium
Yeah.
in the diet that I was eating, and I've always struggled to have enough sodium in my diet.
Yeah, when I'm going really low carb, when I'm aiming for like, ketosis, for example, when I'm trying to be in a ketogenic state, I definitely am conscious of my sodium intake. And when I wake up in the mornings, because we all tend to be a little bit dehydrated when we wake up in the
Right.
mornings. I will put a little bit of salt in water and drink that, and I feel it gives me so much energy. It's like a subject. It could be, I mean, again, I'm like an N of one subject here, but I definitely feel that sometimes in the morning when I wake up, I putting a little bit of salt in my water and drinking that, I feel it makes me feel great. And then I drink a little bit of black coffee, and I'm good to go. And on top of that, one thing that I'm really into is saunas. There's a lot of really good research now coming out on sauna use. And so, when you go into a sauna, you sweat a lot. You lose a lot of sodium. I keep a little vial of salt in my gym bag. And after I hit the sauna for, a good half an hour to an hour, I go to my gym bag, I sprinkle some salt in my mouth. And
Great.
yeah, you don't feel that sense of persistent lightheadedness. I think that often accompanies, you know, a good workout or like an extended sauna session.
Max, you've mentioned N of one a couple times. For the audience, can you just describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so N of one basically, when you look at any study, the N is the amount of subjects in that study. And generally speaking, the more the merrier. So when I say N of one, basically what I'm meaning is that I am my own personal experiment.
Yeah.
I'm always willing to challenge my own theories and my own hypotheses and iterate in my diet by tweaking things here and there. And I think that we should all think about ourselves as N of one experiments. We should always be willing to challenge our own theories and to, be able to look at cause and effect, by doing certain things, seeing how it's going to reflect in the way we feel in our body composition. And if things aren't working, be able to change. That's really what science is. It's not being sort of emotionally tied to any one outcome or any one variable. It's about experimenting and always be remaining open-minded to you know having your theories proved perhaps or disproved. And also, I don't want people to think that I'm projecting my own personal experience with my own diet and my own lifestyle onto other people. Like you're different from me. You have a different, fitness background. You've got different genes. You're a different gender. And so, I want people to know that I'm not just like projecting what has worked for me, as something that I think will work for you. I think, everybody's different. So that's just my own little like quick way of offering a disclaimer.
With the observations, the experiences that you hear from people, through your Facebook, through your Instagram, all over, through all of the television work that you do, what would you want the audience to really hear that they may not know that could be transformative in this journey around macronutrients and weight loss and brain health? You have a book coming out, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm super excited to put out my first book, Genius Foods, which, I think is going to really help people in a big way separate fact from fiction and understand that, everybody, while everybody's different and there are many individual tweaks that one can make to their diets in accordance with their genes, in accordance with their fitness levels, gender. There are also some salient takeaways that I think are applicable to the vast majority of people. And that is that, for the most part, we're eating way too many carbohydrates and we are way more sedentary than our ancestors. Even those of us who like to think of ourselves as being active are a lot less active than we were for the vast majority of our evolution. So, I think people should think about carbohydrates not as something that they need necessarily, but as something that should be a performance enhancing tool. After you have a great workout, eat your brown rice. After you have an amazing workout where you've depleted your muscles of stored sugar and they essentially become a sponge for the sugar that you eat, have your brown rice bowl. Have a sweet potato, for example. But for most people that are struggling with problems with their weight, that are hyperinsulinemic, that have chronically elevated levels of insulin, which may one day lead to them being diagnosed as pre-diabetic or diabetic, the notion that they need to, or that they should eat grains, or that whole wheat wrap that they get every day at lunch, really not ideal. On the other hand, most people are not eating enough vegetables and all the micronutrients that vegetables contain. So, I would say one of the most practical takeaways that I like to give people is to just, eat a large salad every single day. Every single day, make that commitment to yourself to eat a large fatty salad. And when I say a fatty salad, I don't mean, throwing a bunch of tortilla strips and cheese and ranch dressing on top of it. I mean, take a bunch of dark leafy greens, douse them in extra virgin olive oil, because actually you need fat to absorb those precious carotenoids that we were talking about earlier, the lutein, zeaxanthin. Those actually, the absorption of those really powerful brain boosting compounds is negligible without a fat source. So, huge fatty salad. You want to have dark leafy greens, throw in some carrots, throw in some beets, lots of extra virgin olive oil, maybe throw in an egg. Have that every single day. Not only are you checking off so many of your nutritional boxes with a salad, it's a perfect vehicle for extra virgin olive oil. You're getting tons of dietary fiber, which your microbiota love. But research actually suggests that people that eat one salad a day of dark leafy greens actually have brains that look 11 years younger on brain scans. I mean,
Remarkable.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy I ate my romaine last night.
Yeah, you ate your romaine. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
every day. I mean, I agree with you. It's just that feeling that I think we get from eating dark leafy greens.
Yeah.
There's an energy that comes with it. But I love what you said about fatty salads,
Yeah.
right? So when we think about eating our salad, it's a vehicle, like
Yeah.
you just mentioned, for the good fats and making sure that you are getting the good fats because salad dressings are just filled with so much garbage.
Yeah. So commercial, yeah, definitely by all means, avoid commercial salad dressings. They're usually the worst
Yeah.
offenders. They're, usually canola oil or corn oil or soybean oil. These oils are really unhealthy. Yeah, instead make your own salad dressing. I'm obsessed with this salad dressing. It's not good if you can't eat it on date night. You're definitely not going to want to kiss anybody after eating it, but take a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, apple cider vinegar, nutritional yeast, which I'm obsessed with. Throw some like raw chopped up garlic in there,
Yum.
super spicy. Throw in some salt, like Himalayan pink salt, black pepper. Black pepper actually enhances the bioavailability of a lot of the polyphenols in that salad. A lot of people are familiar with the ability of pepper to improve the bioavailability of turmeric, but it actually works for other plant compounds as well. By inhibiting certain liver enzymes that detoxify them, you're actually enhancing the biological activity of a lot of these plant nutrients. And so yeah, so like it's sort of like a Caesar salady type dressing, but it's like really spicy and savory, and I just love it. And you can get crazy with it. Throw in some hemp seeds. Yeah, I mean, go nuts, go wild. Salads are like really great sort of petri dishes for you to just try all kinds of different things.
I love it.
Yeah,
So you wrote your book, Genius Foods,
yeah,
with Dr. Graywall.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that choice to partner with him on this incredible book.
Yeah, so I met Dr. Graywall at a health conference, and I was just, struck by his personal story. I thought people really need to hear that this exists, that a person can go through medical school, which we citizens think of sort of as being like this, the end all be all way in which a person learns everything there is to know about health, right? Like that Dr. Graywall could go through medical school and come out at the other end not knowing anything about how to fix his own obesity. In fact, medical school he credits as having made him fat because of the stress of going through it. But it didn't teach him anything about how to lose that weight and how to regain his metabolic health. So he basically has a story that, in a way, mirrors my own. Even though he's a medical doctor, we both sort of had to, out of necessity, become experts in these fields that we weren't experts in previously, that we were completely ignorant to. I had to teach myself about nutrition and brain health and metabolic health, and Paul had to teach himself about nutrition and brain health and metabolic health. And it's really kind of crazy that doctors are undertrained when it comes to nutrition and exercise, but it's a fact. It's actually been researched and published. Researchers have done surveys with medical students, and they find that they're really undertaught when it comes to these topics. And so me and Paul sort of have we've got very similar journeys in that sense, where we both, out of necessity, out of passion, really had this drive to become experts in topics that we weren't experts in, all motivated by personal passion. And I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 months after I had gotten my book deal, I met him, and I was just like, dude, let's collaborate. And I also thought, I really wanted to go deep into the mechanisms of health in Genius Foods. And there were certain aspects of health that, were sort of like gray areas for me that I wanted a real clinical perspective on. So I was very familiar with the research, but in terms of like a clinical perspective, that's where I really thought that having Paul involved, he would add a lot of value. So when it comes to cardiovascular health and separating fact from fiction in terms of cholesterol, for example, Paul added a really great perspective. So yeah, I'm really proud of what we've accomplished together. And Paul's brilliant. So
It's going to be great. I
yeah,
can't wait for it to come out and for everyone to have a chance to read it.
thanks so much. Yeah, I'm pumped.
Max, this is unbelievable. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and guidance and curiosity into areas of our health and well being that we can all benefit from.
Thank you so much for having me.